Geico presents Our Town, Season 2, a 30-minute podcast produced by Best Bart Communications, a small but fierce client-centered marketing company powered by decades of experience and well-established business networks. Geico, 15 minutes can save you 15% or more on car insurance. Now, here's your host, Andy Ockershausen.
This is Andy Ockershausen, and this is Our Town. And we have such a delightful friend and one of the great women of my lifetime. In spite of, my wife is right up there too, but she made such an impact on our town. So many ways, at a national and local level. She served in the United States Congress, representing the 8th Congressional District of Maryland, as a Republican. That'll never happen again, but she's a mother to 9 children, a teacher, and an advocate for human rights, women's health, and domestic violence issues. But did she stop after Congress? No way. She was just beginning, and she's here today to tell us about what she's been up to beside Ambassador to France. She's had a wonderful career after Congress, and that's Connie Morella.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. Your very lavish introduction reminded me of something attributed to Mae West, if you can remember that name from the old stuff, right? When she said, "Too much of a good thing can be downright enjoyable." So thank you.
Oh my God! Come up and see me sometime. Right. I remember all those things. I think McKen might be too young. Ken's our technical director. You remember Mae West? Oh yeah. But Connie, you have had such a remarkable impact on our town. In addition to your work in Congress, but it's so many things, and you were from Somerville, Massachusetts. It's a long way from Washington, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it was great. And you went to school. You went to grammar school in Somerville?
I did indeed, and high school. Mm-hmm.
Catholic school?
No.
Wow.
Public school.
But you went to BU. That's not Catholic either.
No, right.
Is that a city school, or is that part of UMass?
No, that's a private school.
Private school.
Boston University.
But it's not connected with any religious order.
Well, it's like so many of these major universities have some kind of a connection, sometimes very remote. There is a remote connection with Methodists. Just like American University is Methodist.
I know that. Wesley, John Wesley.
With. Exactly. And so Boston University is in that tradition.
Very, very independent school. So you learned a lot and learned to be very independent. Now, how did you learn? Did you learn growing up to be a Republican, or did that evolve?
No. I in Somerville, Boston, Massachusetts, you're not a Republican. So I grew up in a Democratic household. I was a Democrat when we married and came to Washington, D.C., and then moved into Maryland. But what happened? My epiphany came when Charles Mack Mathias, who was the senator, was
Mac
running.
Very well.
Yes, Mack was running for office, and he had very stiff competition. He was a Republican. So I had to cross over and become a Republican to vote for him in a primary. I did, and I thought, well, I think I'll go back. And then I looked at what was happening in our country. I saw Jacob Javits, Clifford Case, Everett Dirksen. I saw all of these great men who brought both sides together, who were Republicans, who believed in fiscal responsibility, but also believed in liberal rights,
sure.
Rights for people. So I stayed a Republican. I became the moderate Republican, which then gradually became sort of an endangered species, and now it is almost extinct. Politics is about people, and it's getting to know the people that you represent. It's interesting because Charlie Cook of the Cook Report, I introduced him recently, and I said, gee, I remember, Charlie, that you once said that I knew my district because I would go to the opening of an envelope. Well, he then added to that, he said, well, and when my daughter was a Blue Ribbon School recipient, you were there, and the only way you could avoid shaking your hand, Connie, was if you were in the men's room. That's connection.
Connie, but you fought the good fight. Many elections, you were reelected.
Oh, yes.
And you had a wonderful plurality one time. I remember that. You got more votes than anybody had ever been in that seat before. Was that Mac's seat before he moved into Senate? Mathias?
Well, you had so much redistricting taking place. he had it for a very short time, and then eventually it went to Newton Steers. Remember that tradition?
Oh, I remember that name.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when it went from being the moderate Republican to becoming more Democratic, right?
Well, the western part of the county, of the budget, was up towards, what is that, it's way up in the mountains up there. That was always Republican. And the lower part of the county, Garrett County, was a Republican county.
Exactly.
Montgomery was mixed.
Exactly. Yeah, and Mac Mathias came from Frederick.
Yeah, I knew that.
Frederick was kind of part of that domain, but then that changed, and Mac went over to the Senate and continued with that independent, moderate Republican streak and strand, working together. That's what politics is about. Politics is about
before you got in
negotiating.
Congress, you were in the Maryland House of Delegates. That's where you had the big margins, right? Representing Bethesda.
Represented Bethesda, right.
In the House of Delegates. It's...
for 8 years.
Maryland is a peculiar place now because it's an completely overwhelming Democrat state, and they elected a Republican governor. That's almost impossible.
I know it. And I think he's
Not
doing
because
a great
he was
job.
a Democrat. People liked him.
Yes, he did a good, and he's been very good on the issues.
He's been very good.
He's been very thoughtful. He doesn't jump into the fray. He studies it, and then he comes out with a position, and it's what people applaud.
He changed his mind on that fracking, and I like that very much. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but it shows that he is flexible.
Right,
and I think the public likes that.
Yes, they do.
And I knew his dad real well. Wasn't he in the seat out there? Where was he from Congress?
Prince George's County. As
Am
a
I
matter
right?
of fact,
Were
his
you all
father
served together?
No, I never served with him, but I knew him. He was very good in terms of, when you had the situation with Nixon, he showed that he was very gutsy in that regard. The father did. When he left Congress, he also ran for governor and didn't make it.
I know
so
that.
it must be a great feeling of success
that
his son has it. He also became the county executive in Prince George's County.
By
so
election.
He served
Voted in.
Served in the House. He served as county executive. And
he grew up in Northeast Washington, where I'm from. He went to Gonzaga.
Yes.
I went to Eastern, but I knew him in high school long time ago.
Right.
And fine man. And
I agree with you.
Great.
I agree.
Connie, but all the things you've done in the Congress, and you didn't get reelected, but it more or less jump-started you with a new world, a new career.
Oh, yes.
Maybe it's been the best thing that happened to you. You can't tell.
I agree. I've just been very lucky. I mean,
no, luck follows hard work. Luck follows speed.
Thank you. No, as a matter of fact, the last campaign where we had redistricting, and so Prince George's County became part of the district that I represented. I must say, at the end of that campaign, I said to myself, you did everything you could. You raised all the money you needed. You had all the endorsements of newspapers. You had all the people. There was nothing else you could do, and there was a nice sense of knowing whatever happens that you did all you could. I've never looked back and said I should have done this or that. And then at that time, you may recall, the governor was Paris Glendening.
Spendening, we call it.
Yeah, really? Well, as a matter of fact,
Paris was a good friend of Bud Dogger. You knew that.
Oh,
Sherry,
yes. Oh, I used to see them at his parties. But, in fact, we even went to Israel early on together. But I said to Paris at one point, I said, well, okay, Paris, redistricting took place. But I said, that's okay. I went from Paris Glendening to Paris, France. So who won that one?
That's not a lateral move, incidentally. That's definitely uphill.
That was
We're
great.
talking with Connie Morella, and we're going to take a break here now. And Connie's got a lot more stories, and I'm going to make her tell them. This is Andy Ocker's house, and this is our town.
Daddy, where do babies come from?
Honey?
Mommy went to the store.
Oh, well, you see, there's a mommy and a daddy, right?
Right.
And see, when they call Geico, they could save a bunch of money on car insurance.
Oh, really? And that makes them happy?
Yes, that makes them very happy.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we could have this talk, Sunshine.
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
You're listening to Our Town.
This is Andy Ocker's house, and this is our town. And talking with Connie Morella, a very dear friend and a very important part of our town's history, and did so much for our town when she was in the Congress, and still does it in many ways. But one of the names that popped up in your resume was Mark Shriver. Did Mark run against you for Congress?
Mark,
his name popped up to me. I like Mark. He's a good guy.
Oh, I do too. Mark did serve in the state legislature, and then he aspired to go to Congress, and he ran in the Democratic primary, and he lost the primary. Yeah. So I never had a chance to
Well, who did you run against?
against
who beat him
him
in that primary?
Not
Van Hollen.
No. Yes. Van Hollen,
Hollen,
because it was the last, right,
Chris.
exactly.
last
I was
one,
thinking
yeah.
of the previous election.
Well, we know Chris through a third party.
Exactly. No, Chris beat him in the primary. But it's interesting because I just finished reading the book that Mark Shriver wrote called Pilgrimage. It was given to me and it was autographed to me by Mark. And it has to do with his looking at the biography of the Pope.
Wow.
And how initially he thought, I don't know that I want to take this on. But he was asked to do it after he had written about his father. And he wrote
Sarge.
it, and I enjoyed reading the book, and I think it's a tribute to Mark that he took that on and pursued it throughout.
It must be totally interesting, has to be, to find out about the Pope.
It is because the Pope was such a fascinating person.
He really is.
Hey, listen, get him on your program.
No, we have a friend that wrote him a letter, wanted to serve him some Maryland crabs the next time he comes to Andrews Air Force Base. Connie, speaking of that, the Shrivers, they were in your district also.
Oh,
Sarge,
yes, and I knew Sergeant well. He would show up at the various events, educational events and all. He was such a fine man. And you know what you're pointing out is you can have some people as opponents and still be friends.
Oh, but dear friends.
And still be good friends. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, many times. Sarge used to spend time at a place called the Dancing Crab, a little a restaurant, because they could get TV before cable was in. They would I say the word jip. They'd get a signal from Channel 9 and send it downstairs, and I don't know how they unscrambled it. But he could watch football in this little restaurant, and he said, I might as well stay here. I don't have one at home. We don't have cable yet. He said, cable's coming. That was a long time ago. And I saw him, and he was sitting there one day with Harry Byrd Jr., the senator from Virginia. See, that's what you were talking about. They must have been in two different worlds, but they both like pro football. So they like the Dancing Crab.
Exactly.
That's a little off color, but it's a good one, right?
Yeah. But it also points out something that what we need to do is get to know people. First of all, show respect for them. Whether it's somebody who is your carpenter or whatever, show respect for them, get to know them, listen to them, learn from them, and then you can lead. And I think that's the key to whatever the profession is that you're in. Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, when seeing political figures, I guess because being here all my life, I grew up with them, and I was never impressed or overwhelmed because it was a senator or a congressman or whatever it is. That if I knew them as people, it was much more important to know them as people than know them as an official. You know, like I had a friend, Charlie Thone, a congressman from Nebraska, out of the world. He was introduced to me by a third party. We became very good friends. I met so many people through politics, and they're all great people. Mm-hmm. And being in Washington was unique to meet these people and be part of they were part of our audience as broadcasters. We thought members of Congress were very important as listeners. And when we did our news, we did it with news that we had a guy named Joe McCaffrey. Every night on WML, he reported what went on in Congress that day. It doesn't exist anymore. People take it for granted, but we never did. And McCaffrey was brilliant. He had Tip O'Neill would be a regular on his program. Just one of the good guys. I'm sure you knew Tip real well.
Oh, of course. Okay. Tip was from the district that my family were in Massachusetts, right? and then he was my constituent, so I'd always remind him of that. So now you're my constituent here.
You belong to me.
He lived in Montgomery, Montgomery County. Very fine man. And you see, he and Reagan, and more recently Tom Foley and Bob Michael. You know, when Tom Foley died, Tony and I went to the memorial service at the Capitol in
Was
Statuary
he ambassador
Hall.
to Japan at
Yes,
one
he
time?
became after
That.
Yes, and the person, President Clinton was there, President Obama was there, Joe Biden was there. The person who got the standing ovation was Bob Michael. Now, why? Because Bob talked about the fact that once a week they would meet in his office. The alternate
He was
week-
minority leader.
That's
majority
right. He
leader,
was
whatever.
minority leader, and Tom Foley was at that time speaker.
Right.
And the next week they would meet in Tom's office, and they would laugh, they would joke, they would argue, they would discuss, but they would come to some kind of agreement. It was a kind of congenial atmosphere that they established. Well. He got applause because that represented the best in bipartisanship. But what happened is that when Tom Foley left office, he didn't leave voluntarily. He was, as Speaker, was defeated. Isn't that interesting? And what he did when he gave his farewell speech in Congress is he called Bob Michael up to preside as Speaker. Now that
That's
represented class
Oh,
and
my God.
bipartisanship. Just recently, Bob Michael died, and
Oh, he
Tony.
did? I didn't know it was recent. I've
and
seen him around town over the years.
Tony and I went to the memorial. This was only maybe 3 weeks or
going to a
so
lot of
ago.
funerals, Connie.
I know. Going to
Me
too many.
too.
Too many, I know. And it was interesting because in the program they had a statement that was made by Bob Michael, who was a singer. And he talked about the fact that you can have the brass, you can have the concussion, you can have the different variations, but then they come together in harmony by coming together. Same kind of thing. So I didn't mean to spend so long on
I
that,
want
but
that, Connie, from your perspective.
it's a
so
concept
important.
of bipartisanship. That's what legislating well is about. It's to look at the issues, get to it's to deliberate and then come to some
Absolutely,
consensus.
and make a deal.
Yeah, make a deal.
That's what they did.
Make a deal.
Connie, but see, your perspective is so great on that because you lived through the biggest and the brightest years. And I don't know, almost everyone we talk to says almost the same things you're saying. Why can't it get done? Why is it so stubborn that these guys can't get along? Like Tip said, come on down, we'll have a drink.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
I love it. Well, this is Andy Ockershout. This is Our Town. I'm speaking with Connie Morella. I want to talk to her about her big job after she left office, and we haven't touched on that, Connie, but we will. This is Our Town.
Are you still promising yourself or your spouse to get your will updated and a good basic estate plan in place? Are you finally ready to make sure you don't leave a mess behind for your family to clean up? Give me just 2 hours and I'll show you how. I'm attorney Mike Collins, host of radio's Legally Speaking show. Come to my seminar and I'll teach you what you need to know about wills, trusts, taxes, probate, how to keep your money in your family. Register now at MikeCollins.com and I'll even waive the tuition. That's MikeCollins.com.
Hi, Tony Sybil here to tell you about Tony and Joe's and Nick's Riverside Grill at Washington Harbor in Georgetown. Spectacular new restaurants. We've spent a lot of time rebuilding. You'll love it. It's really fantastic. For any information, you can go online to TonyandJoes.com. It'll be a wonderful experience for the whole family. Call 202-944-4545 to make reservations. Everything is fabulous. You've got to come down and have some wonderful food.
You're listening to Our Town with Andy Ockershausen. Brought to you by Best Bark Communications.
This is Andy Ockershout, and this is Our Town. We're talking with Connie Morella, which I should say we're listening to Connie Morella, who's fabulous, who has so much to say and so many stories about Washington and politics in our town. But one of the crowning achievements of her long career, we both had it, Connie, is her appointment as ambassador to France. That must have been a thrilling thing for you.
It was indeed. I've always been interested in multinational politics, and I believe, as John Donne said, no man or woman is an island. We're all connected, and truly we are. So it was great. One of the things that was particularly, I think, appropriate to mention about my ambassadorship, it was actually to something called the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's a group of now 34 of the most developed nations, came about from the Marshall Plan. George Marshall, when he spoke in 1947 at Harvard, he talked about a family of nations, and that became the Marshall Plan. What's interesting, these countries and the concept of OECD is to level the playing field. So our companies in the United States can work on an even keel with countries overseas, and they work by consensus, and that's why I mention it. Do you notice, like, you have to make sure that you are going to go along with 34 countries, and so therefore, when you are an ambassador, you do not ad lib like I did when I was in Congress. I didn't ad lib, but I was out of the box.
Yeah,
I was an independent. You know, I could vote my country, my constituents, my conscience.
Your conscience.
But when you're an ambassador, you vote the way your country wants you to vote. So therefore, I would pull together whatever the disagreements were, and I would do a video every Monday with the State Department about the issues that were coming up, and I'd say, well, you know, Poland feels this way, France feels this way, Spain does. Let's try to work this out together so that we accomplish what we want to accomplish, knowing them. And that's the way it worked, and that's what Congress should emulate, the idea of getting to know, listen, and then coming to some conclusion.
Spending time together to understand each other's
In fact, we were recommended. We were recommended, kind of the protocol of OECD was you get to know your colleague ambassadors by entertaining them, for instance, during the week with their families.
Wow.
So you knew the families too. And that is an element that I think, again, Congress should do. Go on trips, have bilateral meetings, have families come together. I have a list of mending that branch of government,
keeping things going. Well, I know the ladies of my life who visited you in France came back like 10 feet taller than when they left, and Catherine Malloy was one of them. I know, and they said everything was just so great with you, and when they were there in France, it must have been a great thing for you to have your own people come visit you like that.
It was indeed. It was a great honor and a great privilege to represent our country there.
Oh, I know it. And you had a wonderful place to live. Is that owned by the U.S.?
Yes, it is.
Or is it rented? Did they own it?
They own it.
It's a gorgeous building.
It is, indeed. Yeah,
like
it was
a palace,
great having
what
them
Kathy
come.
said. So then, Connie, one of the things that became important to me was knowing Connie Morella is wanting to visit Normandy, which is something I heard about it on radio. I lived through it because we had a lot of guys from the 29th Division were in the assault on the wave. And they were from Maryland, D.C., and Virginia National Guard. Several young people in our neighborhood were involved. So I listened to it on the radio. We had no idea what was going on in the public. You know, we had this communication age has destroyed that. We know things before anybody else should know them. And just being part of that, and your name meant so much to people that Connie Morella, were you on the commission? What is the Battlefield Commission thing?
The American Battle Monuments Commission, right.
And who appointed you to that? The president?
Actually, the president did. It's a presidential appointment. Actually, that started back at the end of World War I. Incidentally, we're going to be commemorating the U.S. Going into World War I this year. 100 years ago. We'll be going to...
I don't remember that, Connie.
Indeed.
My father was in it, but not me.
Right. Well, this commission was started at the end of World War I by Pershing, Blackjack Pershing. And the question was, well, what do you do with these warriors who now deceased? Do you send them back to their families? And then the idea came up, well, maybe we could bury them where they fought and where they died. And so the question was then given to the families, you may make a decision. That started this Battle Monuments Commission. Actually, Pershing stayed there till he died, and his successor was George Marshall. So there, George Marshall comes into the picture again,
right,
until he died.
Marshall was just a colonel or something during World War I, and he was on the staff of Blackjack Pershing. I just read about that.
Yeah.
And I was at Army-Navy Club, and there was a funeral procession just 2 weeks ago of a young Marine who was killed on Tarawa. in 1942, and they just found his remains, and they brought it back for a flu. All the Marine brass was there. It was a big thing to the Marine Corps to bring him home. And it was so touching. And I know it was all, there's a big thing in the Pacific where they have burial grounds, correct?
Oh, yes.
Didn't you travel the whole world with that?
No.
You didn't visit?
No, not really overseas. Well, overseas, obviously, when we're talking about Belgium and the Netherlands and France. And
that great cemetery right above Normandy.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Magnificent
really
facility.
Fantastic, yeah. It's, as Pershing said, time will not dim the glory of their deeds. And when you go, you mentioned Normandy, the visitor center they have in Normandy, when you go, as you're leaving, there's a room where they have portraits of some of the fallen. And you look at them and you say, that's like the kid next door who delivered my newspapers. That's like somebody who went to school with my daughter. And so it's a reminder.
Absolutely. It's very personal.
Stark reminder of how sacred those grounds are and how people in the world need to see it.
I'm glad our country has decided to do that and support it. And I know it is an expense on the country, but it'll be there forever. That cemetery is dedicated forever. And the land is dedicated. It's just so great. And Janice and I just enjoyed that trip so much. I thought about you all the way.
And the countries really help out too. They help out with the land.
The French do.
They're very proud of having it there too.
Love the Americans.
Yeah, exactly. For good reason.
And they loved all those kids that fell there. You were talking about that when I was at high school, at Eastern High School, with a young man. He graduated in the end of January in 1945, and he was killed on Okinawa in like April of that year. He had 3 months out of high school. He's dead. I mean, that's the way it was then, Connie.
That's absolutely
They were raking up everybody to send them overseas in 1945.
Last year I spoke at the American Cemetery in the Netherlands, and I point this out because they have like 8,301 burials, and they have like 1,400 on the Wall of the Missing. Every one of them has been adopted by a Dutch family, and there is a waiting list.
Is that right?
And on the Memorial Day, there was a reunion of the families that have adopted and the people from the United States, the loved ones of those whose lives were taken from them, came together, and it was so beautiful.
Must have been so compelling.
Yeah.
See, Connie, there's so much more to you than Congress, which I know about. It is. Because you're the epitome of somebody that gets around. Even though you're not collecting votes, everybody sees Connie Morella everywhere, and that's so great because you offer so much and you've done so much, and we're so proud of you, Connie.
Thank you.
I wish I'd have lived in Maryland, but unfortunately I live in the city of Washington. I didn't have a congressman.
Oh, listen, I do want you to know that for several years I chaired the D.C. committee, and I chaired it.
Were you the chair?
Yes, I chaired it at the time when I had legislation in to give Eleanor Holmes Norton the right to vote totally on the floor of the House. She could vote in committee, but not on the floor. Yeah.
I was on the board with Bud Delegate with the Washington Convention and Visitors Association. Right. I was part of the Board of Trade. And we were having a problem getting something built or something done in the city. And there was a senator from Vermont named Patrick Leahy, was the chairman of the Senate committee, the House committee, the Senate D.C. committee, and said, is there anybody that can we talk to him? I said I don't know. Let's find out. So I had a friend from NAB that owned a radio station in Montpelier, WJOY, Joy, and I called him and said, do you have a relationship? Do you know Pat Leahy? He said, I'm his finance chairman. And I said, bonanza, let me tell you. So we went back to the hearing in 2 days. He said, I'm so glad to see you guys are here. And he said, Austin Kinney was there, and he said, I'm so glad to see you, Andy. I didn't know you were a friend of Frank Bolt's. What can we do? What can I do to help you? I mean, it was open sesame to know the right person that knew the right person.
Exactly. Knowing people helps.
It was all about it. This man was an obscure station in Burlington. I never thought I'd ever get to see him again, but he became a dear friend. He picked up the phone and called and said, Pat, take care of this guy. He's a good guy.
Fantastic.
That's what happens, doesn't it?
Great.
And being in Washington, they made that happen for me. Connie, what are the things that you looking forward to doing now? You've done so much. We owe you, we. America owes you. What do you got on your plate?
Well, actually...
Travel? You got kids up at the zoo.
I travel often with various functions that I care very much about. I see retirement as rewirement. So there have been some changes in the things I do, but I'm doing things I like. I'm a political junkie still. I mean, I had a breakfast this morning with some of the moderate Republicans talking about what they're planning to do. They had others were there, of
Good
course,
for you.
too.
And you've been through the mill. You can be a great voice.
Yeah, and I'm involved with campaign finance reform, a group called Issue One, the Reformers. We have 180 former members of Congress and former governors, both parties, bipartisan, who are trying to say there are things that people can do about this corrosive money in politics. And we've come up with a framework with possibilities. For
Connie,
instance,
that's great. That's
disclosure, accountability, looking at what's happening with various states in terms of their initiatives with regard to matching funds and limiting funds, looking at the lobbying facet of it, and the framework looks really very good. And the FEC, Federal Election Commission, Citizens United is a terrible decision the Supreme Court made, which said corporations are like people and they can give like that. We're not going to get rid of it right away. I mean, the Supreme Court isn't going to change it right away.
A while. But
within it, it talks about disclosure and accountability, and nothing has been done about it. What do we need to do? We need to get a different FEC, Federal Election Commission. Right now, there are 6 members. There is bipartisan legislation that has been put in, bipartisan, if you can believe that, in Congress. It would make it, instead of 6, make it 5 members, and one of them would be an independent.
Right.
And have term limits, and get them more involved in actually what they're supposed to do. Run the elections in terms of, we want to know who's giving all this money. We want to know where it's coming from.
What are they getting for it, too?
Right, exactly. Then we can figure out.
Babe, right?
That's absolutely right.
Always
so
the
that's one of the things. And then I do some teaching.
You're just so active. But by being active, Connie, that'll keep you energized. You know, we quote this lady from Cleveland's in her late 90s now. She said, my philosophy is get up, get dressed, and get out.
And get out,
and I've lived almost 100. I say that to everybody.
I know.
That's what I'm going for, 100, Connie. And you'll be there with me.
You know, Andy, you talk about things that you're very generous about things I've done, but you are Mr. Washington. I mean, I remember the Man of the Year. I used to tease you about that all the time, or the Board of Trade, and what you've done for Boys and Girls Clubs, and all of the good charities.
We're involved now with Don Bosco, the school out in Tacoma Park.
That's terrific.
Janice is on the board, and we support them. But Connie,
Heroes, I know, wouldn't think of
growing up here, working for the Washington Star, owned WMAL.
Yeah.
And our philosophy was get involved in the community, because when you give, it comes back in so many ways, Connie.
That's true.
And you're a perfect example of that. And that's what we did. Not just me, but all our talent was involved. Janice was involved. All the people were, wherever was sitting in Ken's seat, they were involved. And they brought so much to our company, because we knew what was going on, because somebody was involved. I don't know if that happens anymore, Connie. I hope it does.
I hope so, too.
But it's been so delightful. That I can't tell you how much we enjoy you, Connie. But I have for how many years? I don't want to say that.
Oh, no.
Connie, 50
Be careful.
years. That's a long
Whatever you
time,
say will
Connie.
be incriminating.
No, it isn't. And Tony, will you give my best to Tony? And
I shall indeed.
we see you guys. You come as an entry to us.
Well,
like Janice and I do.
Yes.
Like Bud and Sherry.
Yes.
We always do. This has been Andy Ockershouse. This has been Our Town. We've been talking with Connie Morella, our dear favorite. I wish she was still in Congress. I could get something done. I don't know what it would be, but you would help me. But you've done everything, Connie, a person can do. And thank you for being you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Janice. It's been really great pleasure.
You've been listening to Our Town, Season 2, presented by Geico, our hometown favorite, with your host, Andy Ockershausen. New Our Town episodes are released each Tuesday and Thursday. Drop us a line with your comments or suggestions. See us on Facebook or visit our website at ourtowndc.com. Our special thanks to Ken Hunter, our technical director, and WMAL Radio in Washington, D.C. for hosting our podcast. And thanks to Geico.